Good day everyone, my name is Angelo Nicolay Aparicio. Today, I'll be presenting about Presidential Decree number 984, or more commonly known as the National Pollution Control Law of 1976. This law was one of the very first comprehensive attempts in the Philippines to tackle the growing problem of pollution. It recognized that rapid industrialization and urbanization were causing serious harm to our land, air, and water resources. PD 984 established a framework for regulating pollution, created an enforcement body, and set penalties for violators. Essentially, this law became the foundation of modern environmental legislation in our country. PD 984 was signed on August 18, 1976 by President Ferdinand Marcos. At that time, the Philippines was facing severe pollution problems, especially in Metro Manila. Rivers were being used as dumping sites for industrial and household waste, while air pollution from the factories and vehicles was worsening. To address these problems, the government passed this decree, which became known as the National Pollution Control Decree of 1976. The law created the National Pollution Control Commission, or NPCC, which became the lead agency for enforcing environmental standards, granting permits, and monitoring pollution. This was a big step forward because for the first time, there was a single coordinated government agency handling pollution control. Objectives. The objectives of PD 984 were clear and ambitious. First, it sought to protect public health and welfare. Pollution was not just an environmental issue, it was making people sick, contaminating food and water supplies, and reducing quality of life. Second, the law aimed to create a legal framework to regulate pollution coming from land, air, and water sources. This gave industries specific guidelines to follow. Third, it established penalties for violators, meaning that non-compliance would no longer be tolerated. Finally, it sought to balance economic development with environmental protection. The Philippines wanted to grow economy but not at the expense of destroying its natural resources. Scope of the law. The scope of PD 984 was very broad. It applied to pollution from land, air, and water. So whether the waste was solid, liquid, or gaseous, it fell under this law. It covered industrial, commercial, and agricultural activities. That means factories, farms, and even business had to comply with pollution regulations. Both public and private establishments were held accountable, so even government-run facilities were not exempt from the law. In short, PD 984 applied to almost everyone contributing to pollution in the country, which was a significant step at the time. National Pollution Control Commission, or NPCC, to implement this law. National Pollution Control Commission, or NPCC, to implement this law, the National Pollution Control Commission, or NPCC, was created. The NPCC had several important powers. It could issue or deny permits to industries for waste discharge. It could conduct inspection to check if companies were complying with pollution standards. It could establish effluent and emission standards, which are the maximum limits of pollutants allowed in water and air. And it could coordinate with other government agencies and local governments to strengthen enforcement. In essence, the NPCC became the country's watchdog for pollution control. Key provisions. PD 984 contained several key provisions. First, all establishments discharging waste into air, land, or water had to secure a permit. This meant industries couldn't just dump waste anywhere. They needed approval. Second, the NPCC had the power to deny, suspend, or revoke permits if companies failed to comply. Third, the decree required industries to install pollution control devices, for example, water treatment facilities before discharging wastewater, or filters to reduce smoke emissions. Fourth, industries were required to keep proper records, monitoring reports, and submit to inspections. These provisions created a system of accountability, making sure pollution was managed and not left unchecked. Prohibited acts. The law also listed specific prohibited acts. This included discharging waste without a permit, exceeding allowable pollution levels, failing to install pollution control devices, refusing to cooperate with NPCC inspections, and operating facilities that pose serious pollution risks to communities. By clearly identifying prohibited acts, PD 984 made sure there was no room for excuses when it came to polluting activities. Penalties and sanctions. Violators of PD 984 face serious penalties. This included fines and imprisonment depending on the severity of the violation. Non-compliant establishments could face immediate closure, preventing them from continuing polluting operation. Permits could be suspended or revoked, meaning a company could lose the legal right to operate. Polluters were also made civilly liable for damages caused by their actions. This meant they had to pay for harm done to people, property, or natural resources. Lastly, the government could issue injunctions, legal orders to stop polluting activities right away. Significance. PD 984 was highly significant. It was the first comprehensive pollution control law in the Philippines. Before this, pollution was not really addressed in the structured way. It laid the foundation for later environmental laws such as Philippine Clean Air Act of 1999, RA 8749, and the Philippine Clean Water Act of 2004, RA 9275. It also helped raise public awareness. In the 1970s, environmental issues were not always a priority. PD 984 made people realize that pollution was not just an inconvenience, but a real threat to health and the environment. Most importantly, it created institutional mechanism, a government body, a legal process for addressing pollution systematically. Limitations. However, like many pioneering laws, PD 984 also had its limitation. One major limitation was weak enforcement. The NPCC lacked the manpower and resources to monitor every establishment in the country. Second, there was limited public participation. People did not yet have a strong voice in environmental decision making. Third, the law was more reactive than preventive. It focused on regulating pollution after it happened rather than preventing it through education, awareness, and sustainable practices. Finally, as time passed, new types of pollution emerged such as toxic chemicals and hazardous waste that required stronger laws, leading to the passage of a new legislation in the 1990s and 2000s. In conclusion, Presidential Decree No. 984 was a landmark in Philippine environmental history. It established pollution control standards, created the NPCC, and laid down penalties for violators. While it had its limitations and was eventually replaced by more modern laws, PD 984 remains a milestone because it sparked the movement toward environmental governance in the Philippines. It taught us that economic growth and environmental protection must always go hand in hand. Without one, the other cannot be sustained. So when we talk about environmental laws today, we must remember that PD 984 was the foundation that made them possible.